goes with the picture, right? Like out of placement, you would assume that these things go together. And you see what that caption says, right? Residents angry with 911. On the connecting page, this was the other story. Police technology to be upgraded, right? And I was like, why are two stories dealing with the police and 911 placed next to a picture, right? Because you're trying to figure out, like, what does this, like, which story goes with this picture, right? And then the picture's all effed up anyway. Like, what's really going on, right? So that was my concern as a journalism student. But then my responsibility, right, in Black Caucus was to advocate for Black students. And so I said, this ain't right? And so I think that either that day, close to that time, we were having a Black Caucus meeting, and I said, okay, I'm gonna talk to my members, right, about what I saw and my interpretation and get their feedback, right? And everybody agreed, like, this doesn't seem right. So there were two freshman students. There was and I don't remember what his name is. I'm not very good with names. But there were two freshman students who were members of Black Caucus. We had one white kid, one white boy,
Michael.
right? And so I asked one of the Black freshmen to call the Daily Collegian and find out what happened, right? So he called, and they gave him just all of the runaround, right? Couldn't answer any questions, whatever. So I said to our one white member, I said, why don't you go down there in person and find out what happened, right? So he goes down there and he finds out what happened. And what they told him, right, because then it was like a little bit more, right? He was like, oh, well, the girl who was supposed to do the story, she got really sick. And, you know, it was just like all of these excuses, right? So for me, I was like, well, but why then did you print a picture, but a picture that wasn't worthy of being printed because it was blurry? Like, who does that if you're one of the top national student newspapers in the country, right? Like, who approved that, right?
Who's your editor?
Right, and so I had both of their feedback, and so at that point I said, okay, well now they have to talk to me. So I got on the phone, and I was like, you know, these are all of the reasons why this is unacceptable from all of these different angles, right? And I said, you know, I really think it's important that you issue some kind of retraction, apology, or whatever, right? And so we went back and forth about that, and they essentially refused to kind of do that. But they said, well, you can we'll print for you a letter to the editor. So you can have that in the paper and you can say whatever you want to about the issue, about whatever, right? So I said, okay, cool. So I'll do that. So this was such a funny picture. This was my letter to the editor. But it was after this appeared in the newspaper. Maybe it was like a week later, and I was on my way to the Black Caucus office, right? And so, you know, I had my routine, and I usually do that. I'm walking through, and I always stop at the desk and check my mail, right? And so I stopped at the desk. They went to the mailbox, handed me the mail, and I'm walking through the hub, going through the mail, and I have this weird envelope, right, that had my name handwritten, but it looked like the way that somebody, if you're right-handed and you decide to write with your left hand, and it's all like, you can read it, but it's just like real choppy and all crazy looking. That's what it looked like. It was my name and my address. There was a stamp, but there was no return address, right? And I was like, oh, this is weird. Open it up. And it was my first racist death threat, right? And this is October of 2000. And I was just like, I got this letter and I'm like shaking, like standing in the hub, like, you know, just like unbelievable. Like, what is this, right? And so I called the first person who I could think of calling, right? Because there weren't a lot of people to call. And so the person who I called was Terrell Jones. And Terrell Jones his position was the vice provost for educational equity, right? So this is a position that was created out of demands that Black students had from 1988, right? Where they had advocated and fought for there to be on Penn State's campus and in their like admin, a person who is like solely of the interest of Black students and students of color on this campus, right? And was like, you know, we need a person who will be on our side and understand our issues and our concerns and our condition and be that person, right? And so educational equity, right? It sounded so good and so important. And so Terrell Jones had this job, and he happened to be the advisor for the Black Caucus at the time. So I called him, and he said, come to my office. And so I go to his office, and I sit in his office, and he's like, oh, well, you don't know who sent this letter. It could be, another student just playing a joke on you. You don't even really need to worry about this, right? So this was like the day before fall break. It was like, just go home and, blah, 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 whatever. And I was like, kind of like, because you want to respect your elders, but then it was just like, and I really do respect my elders, like I really do. But it was just hard to, because, my spirit is telling me, and my mind is like, what? Who plays jokes like that? You know what I'm saying? Because that's not a funny joke. It is not a joke. So, but it was clear that he was like proactively trying to get me to not be so concerned about it, right? But of course, out of my responsibility to Black students, Black people, I made a public announcement, right, in our Black Caucus meeting, and made sure that people knew, because for me, and I don't have you guys seen these letters? Have you seen them? No? Goodness.
All the receipts.
So the first letter was received on Thursday, October 5th, 2000. And it reads, you niggers are all the same. Can't please your low life, drug swilling asses. Who the fuck cares what you think, stupid Black bitch? Right, that's, because I was saying what I thought. You slum-dwelling porch monkeys better be grateful that we let you come here at all. You keep your trap shut and we'll shut it for you. Niggers are to be seen and not heard. Learn your place or leave. You need to keep your Black nigger bucks at home and out of the beds of our white trash whores. You niggers suck. You taint everything you touch. And now you can't even win a goddamn football game. So who needs you now? Like it or leave, Black loudmouth bitch. We ought to tar and feather you, Black slut. Eat shit and die, nigger. Right? So Penn State, for like the first time, it might have been the first time ever, actually had a Black quarterback, right? Which never really happens, right? Because that's like the leadership position on the team, and so they had a Black quarterback. But it just so happened also that they were losing more games than they were winning, right? And the reality of race and racism in America, right, around sports is that, football was integrated, like Penn State was integrated, and a lot of it was specifically around sports and football in particular, right? Like that's when we're valued, right? It's when you can be a commodity, right, and used in a way that makes money, right? And so that's the, and it's not to disrespect any black athlete or any black football player, but the reality of, Penn State is a business, and they're in the business of making money, right? And so for them, their athletes, that's what it is, right? Like the economic community around Penn State, the businesses around Penn State depend on Penn State football. They depend on it. Like if it didn't exist, like things wouldn't be so great and so economically, right? And so because of this losing season, like all of these letters that I got always somehow mentioned the football team, right? So clearly whoever these white supremacists were or are, they already were seething over football because they are upset that we're not winning the games, and how dare you be here and not win because that's your purpose, right? That's how they see it, right? And so, but when I saw this letter, because I had already been seated from my elders in the fact that like I don't just represent myself, right? And that I'm here as a servant leader, I knew that this letter just wasn't about me. Like it didn't matter that it was me. They would have sent this to any one of us, right? Like it didn't really matter. And so I shared it with the community, and our community was outraged, right? As they should be. And we had a press conference, right, in the hub to talk about it, right? And so then there was another police article that spoke to it. And so then that was October 5th. On October 12th, I got a note. And this letter said, "You stupid black whore. We told you to keep your fucking loud mouth shut. Now we will shut it for you. Who will miss you, nigger bitch? One blowjob less is all. Thanks to your picture in the paper, we know what you look like. You'll be easy to find. You niggers never learn, do you? Never know your place. Time to teach you once and for all. You were warned. Time's up, nigger." So it was clear to me at that point. Oh yeah, you can turn that. Okay. So it was clear at that point that I needed to keep doing what I was doing. However, I needed to be just a little bit more cautious about my safety, right? Because the reality is I'm walking around campus. In my senior year, I lived off campus, right? I would take the bus from campus, off campus. It's night, I had like a night class, right? And I just was like, okay, let me not be out here, right? And so what was interesting is that every time, especially the second time that I got the letter, I called Terrell Jones up and I said, like, I'm crying at this point, right? Because I am like literally kind of scared, like, hold up, wait a minute. So I call him and he says to me, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to just make one copy of the letter, call the police and turn it in, and then just call me if you get another one. And I was just like, yeah, okay. And he hung up the phone. And so I was like, okay. So I called the campus police, right? I was standing in the hub. I was actually in the Robertson, and I called. And the campus police station, it's like 10 minutes up the street or whatever. And I'm sitting here like 30 minutes later, it's nighttime, and I literally, I have to go home. And so I'm waiting, and so this cop comes, right, and he's like, okay, is this the letter? And I'm like, yeah, this is the letter, this is the envelope. And he said, okay, has anybody else touched it? And I was like, no. And he took it and he left. There was no conversation. There was no, are you all right?
Right.
There was no, do you need a ride?
Right.
There was no anything at all. And I was just kind of standing there like left standing there like, what the hell? Like, you know, what am I supposed to do? You know, kind of shaking. And I called my friends, my Sankofa Black Caucus friends, and said, you know, I don't want to go home by myself. Right? And so my community showed up for me. And what was interesting, and I just want to, because I know my time speaking, there's a lot of things that I could be sharing, but I just want to iterate this one thing, really about power, right? So Sankofa was started as almost like this project, right? And the project was that, you know, you have all of these Black student organizations, all of these groups, right? And they're, you know, supposed to be meeting these different needs, right? But sometimes there wasn't very good communication between people, or there were a lot of like events happening at the same time, right? And the community's not that big, right? And these are things that are ongoing issues, I'm sure, today. And so,
tell them again.
And so one of the solutions we thought was, let's create something that would bring all of the student leaders from all of these different groups to the table, right? This round table, so that everybody could meet and talk and build together, right? And that we could just have a better experience as Black students on campus. But it became really difficult for a number of reasons, scheduling and all of this stuff, that the actual like leadership couldn't come. But other students, other Black students from these groups, and then Black students in general, just started coming to Sankofa. And so the role of Sankofa was the fact that we would sit around and we would deal with a different topic or theme, right, that impacted the Black community overall. So we would just pick different things that we thought were really important, and we would discuss them, right? One of the things that I'm not sure that happens now, because this is 19, almost 20 years later, and it is phenomenal to me, like phenomenal, awesome, all of the magnificent words that you could use, that this even freaking still happens here, right? But there is a process, and there is a way where Sankofa is supposed to happen. And so I know that one of my priorities, and I've talked to Ashley about this when she reached out to me last year and found me, one of my priorities is to help to cultivate this, because like, y'all, like, this is life or death. And so one of the things that was important to us back then was that it was clear that there were overt issues of racism, right? Like, one of the letters that I got included another letter that I was supposed to give to, it said, give this to the other nigger named Don Edmond, right? So he was another Black student who I didn't know, who had written a letter to the editor that appeared in the Daily Collegian, and he was talking about how as a dark-skinned, sort of big Black man, the way in which people responded to him when he was walking down the street, right? So they automatically assumed that he was an athlete, right? And so all of these different experiences, and how white women would clutch their purses across the street, right? And so all of these things, right, which are common, like, this is real stuff, right? And all of us have to deal with the reality of white supremacy, because it's like a disease that affects all of us, like, and we all get infected with it. White people, obviously, but Black people, the whole entire world, right, like, compares themselves because of white supremacy, right? Like, you have Asian women who are going under surgery to try to create eyelids, right? Like, that look like what is considered to be this beauty standard, right? And so white supremacy is a disease. It's like a spiritual, seething snake that gets up in all of us at a very early age, and it has to be personal activism, right? Like your personal active work on yourself and in your community that helps you to heal from this stuff, and that we have to have almost every day, every week, every year, things we do to help us stay healthy and whole and free, right? Because like, when we talk about, you know, freedom, like liberation, like, you know, these things aren't just like oh, this is the, I don't like to use the word conscious, like these are conscious people, right? Because we're all conscious of different things at different times and, different points in our journey, right? But that we have to raise our consciousness about ourselves. And so Sankofa is, right, it's a think tank, but the reality is that Sankofa is a spirit and it's a principle that goes way back, right? It's a West African principle that goes way back. And why it resonates with us today is because it's something that speaks to something that we need all the time right now, right? Like we always need to be looking back so that we don't repeat some of the same things, right? But the beauty of Sankofa is that there is, in some versions of the symbol of the bird, right? It's looking back, but it's flying forward, but there's an egg in its mouth. And the egg represents the wisdom, right? The best parts of who we are, of our experience that we need to take and bring with us, right? And these are things that are embedded in your DNA, right? These are things that you're just not even aware of, right? But like you may find out, right? Like there's certain things that you always feel really compelled to do, or like, really like for me, I was a late blooming artist, right? I thought I wanted to be a journalist and I do like to write, but I didn't know necessarily that I was an artist. My parents didn't encourage that. I didn't go to art classes as a kid. Like that wasn't the thing, right? But somehow, something about creating with my hands was always calling me, right? And moving my hands and creating with my hands is what really saved my life. It saved my mind after all of this trauma on this campus. It saved me.
Right.
It absolutely saved my life because I probably would have been depressed. I probably would have been working at some crazy place, right? Further losing my soul, right? My spirit all discombobulated, right? Treating other black people all wrong because I was all messed up. Right? So for me, it became my saving grace, right? And so for you all, I just leave you with the idea of Sankofa, but that the practice of Sankofa, that is not just a think tank on a Wednesday that you go to, but the beauty of doing that, right? And because Sankofa has actually like a conversational model that you follow when you do a Sankofa. And those are all the kinds of things that we want to share with you all so that Sankofas can be off the chain and that you can really build a community. But the beauty for us was that we had been actively doing Sankofa and going to Sankofa and building community with each other, that when the shit hit the fan, we had, like, even though again, black people are not a monolithic group, but we had a real clear understanding about white supremacy, racism, how it works, right? And what our issues and our conditions were as black people, and the relationship between what we were learning and the quality of life of black people across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, right? So a lot of the work we did was the stuff that people didn't see and the stuff that y'all probably don't know, the things that aren't talked about, right? So we unpacked all of the stuff that Penn State says, what they say they're doing for black people, right? And we proved to them that they were breaking state and federal laws and mandates and made them sign on the dotted line that they were doing that, right? And so, and we can unpack all of that stuff later. We have, again, the privilege to have captured all of this history on paper, on video, and photos, because I guess it was like the right season and the purpose was right and everything lined up that we were able to do this, which is why I'm even here today, because I didn't go to my graduation, right? I literally needed to roll the F up out of here, and we had, just quickly, I know my time is up talking, but we had worked on building a new curriculum, right? So we were working, and we were telling Penn State to their face, like in their face, like faculty senate, like you're not doing right, and you need to get it together. And these are the data research reasons why, right? And I was telling them earlier that one of the faculty senate members, right, we had to get up in their face, and he was the vice chair of the faculty senate, right? These are the people who are in charge of what you learn every day. All of the colleges of Penn State, this is what they do. He sat across us as Black students and said, I have a steep learning curve when it comes to you. Can you offer me a book list? Right. And so we have to tell them there is a direct correlation to Black people struggling in the state of Pennsylvania, really around the world, right? Because Black students and all students are not using the tools and the research, right? All of this stuff, like we are privileged, right, to be here, not because it's a white school. We're privileged to have access in ways that so many people in our community don't.
That's right.
That's the reality, right? And so for us, we knew that Sankofa was so important because if not you, who's going to do it? Who's going to be the change? And you have a responsibility, right, in discovering and uncovering what your purpose is, right? Like we all aren't going to be doing the same thing. But no matter where you're at, if you're in college, if you're working on, working at a corporation, if you're working at a cooperative, wherever you have Sankofa work to do. Because your purpose is directly intertwined with mine. You doing your personal work, like if I focus on myself and do what I need to do, I'm so much better for you. But if I ignore that and don't do that and just be about, I'm gonna just get my paper and I'm gonna be okay and I'm gonna blah, 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 like you're gonna do a disservice to yourself, but to your entire community. So I'm gonna stop there. There's a lot in my little binder. I got a whole Penn State box at home of all kinds of stuff. But there is I was telling them that there was a sister who was supposed to come meet me here, named Melissa. She's a film producer. And so there's a documentary that some of my colleagues are working on who are Sankofa Black Caucus folks who are spread out across the country and who are continuing to do this kind of work. So, we want to actually create this documentary that really tells and uncovers the story of what happened here, because there's a lot of folds and pages to this whole thing, and then what happened after we left here, because a lot of stuff happened, and when we protested on the football field, I don't know if you guys know that story, when we protested on the football field, and that's when what was happening at Penn State became like national news. The Daily Collegian, well not the Daily Collegian, but the Center Daily Times. The Center Daily Times met with Penn State's administration after we did that, right? And we were aware that the sign said no trespassing, right? So we were aware of that. It was clear, so we knew that we were breaking the law by jumping this guardrail, right? But it was so imperative because I was clear and I felt like my life was literally in danger. But also that one of the last letters that I received said that they killed a Black man, right? And all of the letters up until that point had like threatened that, right? They had threatened the fact that they were going to kill me. And this one last letter detailed all of these things that was clear to me that they did know who I was and that they had followed all of the actions that myself and my friends and other Black students had been doing that entire year. And I was sure that they probably knew where I lived or how to find me, right? Like they knew it. I was clear about that. Like I was clear that the police, who I had originally asked to help to escort me to and from class, because I literally was afraid, right? That at a certain point I just couldn't trust them. I just didn't feel like they had my best interest at heart. And that if somebody was going to do me harm, that they would have turned the other cheek, right? And it was clear to me that, and clear to all of us at the time, that Penn State and that the police were directly involved and knew who was sending these letters, right? And that they just didn't want to deal with that because we uncovered that there were multiple people getting these kinds of letters, right? Including black football players. Including there was one woman named Cynthia Baldwin. Cynthia Baldwin. She was the only sister who was on the board of trustees, right? And she received a death threat, right? Like some of the players' mothers, some of the black football players' mothers received threats, right? Like this is how deeply impacted white folks were about losing football games, right? And so all of these people were said to be investigating, right? And I had never seen any of them. Nobody ever came to talk to me, right? Like the first step in that investigation was to get the fingerprints. They never took my fingerprints to eliminate them from the letter. I actually went to the police headquarters and said, don't you need to do this? Right? And they were like, oh, okay. Right? So like, it was clear that they were not doing anything, right? Like you had all of these folks, the FBI, all of these people were supposed to be involved, right? And so I never received, there was no justice for me. But the reality, you all are my justice. I'm just going to tell you that. Like in reality and in spirit, y'all are my justice. Like, because the fact that I'm even here is my justice. But like reparations now, like I believe in that. You know what I mean? Like I wrapped up a cell phone bill. My cell phone was like early cell phone days. My cell phone was all big. Wrapped up a cell phone bill, having to call the police back and forth, right? And they refused to pay for my, I was a student. Like they refused to pay my cell phone bill. It's just things that just didn't make sense. But I'll stop there. I love the fact that this is even happening. I'm privileged, and this is part of my purpose as well, to even be here. So I'm grateful and humbled.
Question and answer portion. Sit down. So feel free to ask questions. Disrespect my mic. Are there any questions or comments? Anyone? Yes. Can you say your name, please? So like the room, they may not be familiar with who you are.
Hello. My name is Anthony, and I basically have one question. Is it true that you didn't walk for graduation? So why not?
So the last letter that I received said that, and I have a copy of the letter, I don't know if you guys have seen that one, but that one, so the letters are typed, but written by hand, it says PSU equals bonds. And then it said like graduation something. And so for me, I took that as a bomb threat in my graduation. And so I just decided I'm just not going to take the risk. I mean, we had really pushed Penn State, and I know that they did do like metal detectors and stuff like that at the ceremony. But at that point, I was just tired. And for me, I think that like rituals and stuff are really important. But for me, I was like, you know what I mean? To be totally honest, I don't, you know what I mean? I needed to be concerned about myself at that point. And it was just too much stress.
You regret your decision now?
Not at all. Yeah, I think stuff like that is cool. I'm not like a big pomp and circumstance type person, so it wasn't kind of like send me the degree in the mail, like I earned it, and I'm gonna keep it moving.
Hi, I'm Garcelle. I wanted to know, since you grew up in the church, how did you learn to start to differentiate your Christianity
I think there's so much Africanness in the Black church, right? And I think that for me, I never, even though my dad was a pastor and I was like in church my entire life, I never had to, I never was forced to like have to like read the Bible and like memorize stuff and recite it or whatever. So like, if you ask me like, go to chapter, blah, 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 verse, whatever, like, I'm thumbing through like, where's it at? Where's it at? You know what I mean? So for me, like, I wouldn't say that I even had like a real deep, I wasn't like personally, I wasn't super deep in it. Like, I mean, the rest of my family is, to this day, I mean, the majority of the women in my family, my mother was a missionary, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. And so I think for me, like when I began to what I call it, so like I feel like my purpose, how I explain my purpose, I feel like my purpose is a healer, right? And so when I say that I'm a healer, it's not just about like a doctor, like healing a physical scenario. To me, health is wholeness, right? And so I feel like a part of my purpose is to take things that have been broken or things that have been separated and to bring those things together. So I feel like a part of my purpose, an extension of my purpose, as I would describe it, would be like helping people to recognize the fact that spirit and science are the same thing, but spoken through different languages, right? And so for me, it became, there are limitations. In my opinion, in my experience, we put limitations on God and the power of God in the church, right? In those four walls and with some of the rules we have. And this is just my own interpretation and my experience that I can speak to. So just like when I was sharing, when I was working in the youth program and I understood that the 10 Commandments, it was clear that this thing predated the 10 Commandments. Right, like there's a Egyptian story that clearly is like the story of Jesus that predates that story, right? And I was just like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? Because history, like if we were open enough to understanding and learning our history. And just the things that, have intentionally been kept from us. Like it's not an accident why they didn't want, like, enslaved people to read and write, right? Like, because they knew that we'd get free, right? And then we'd be like, hold up, what, right? And so, and it's the same reason why we weren't allowed to have our drum, right? Because they recognized that somehow the power of that beat. There was some type of message. There was something that happened. There's something that happens, right? Like I would tell kids this all the time. When we turn the beat on, there's something that happens that we just can't stop, right? Like there is a scientific thing happening, but you can also describe it in spiritual language that happens when the rhythm, right, this vibration, this energy hits our physical body, right? It interacts with our melanin, it interacts in all of these different ways to shift and change and move our energy, right? So for me, it really just became opening up and not being afraid. Right, because I think the other part of like Christianity sometimes is just Christian period is there's a lot of fear. There's like a lot of fear-based stuff. Like if you don't do this, like this is gonna happen, right? And so like I used to ask my mom, this is the last thing to say, but I used to ask my mom, right, because with the like missionary part of my family, like so if Christianity is the only way, right, like to know Jesus and Jesus is your Lord and Savior, like what about the rest of the world, right? Like if they're not Christian, are you saying that like these millions of people are going to hell? And my mom was like, well, that's why we have missionaries and we go out and we spread the word. But I'm like, well, what if you don't get them in time? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so these are questions I would ask because it just didn't make sense to me, right? And so, you know, today, like, I mean, I respect, wholly respect Jesus. For me, like, Jesus is one of the most awesome ancestors we have, right? I think that, you know, people come on him all the time, but we have a whole bunch of folks, right, in our immediate families who are waiting for us and are like, I'll help you too. I will provide protection for you. I'll help guide your steps because I know you best, right? And so I think that, like, we sometimes are just afraid. We're afraid of the African parts of ourselves, right? And that is generations of intentional stuff. You know what I mean? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Leah Baldwin. I'm working some questions out, but I think the first one is going off of what she was saying. Do you have, like, would you put a label on your religion, or if you're religious, like you practice like African indigenous religion, or?
So I don't put a label on what I do or believe. I honestly believe that there is truth. I believe that there's truth in the Bible. I believe that there's truth in the Quran, right? I've found a lot of truth in, like, Yoruba, right? And, you know, I think that it's almost like different languages, right? Like different spiritual languages to describe some of the common things. Like there are common themes through all of the major religions. And, you know, and all of the major religions find a root in Africa.
And then my second question is, have you made it to Africa in your life?
Have you made it to Africa? Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity through Ujima Collective. So we're a nonprofit that was started by Black women who are all handmade artists and activists and entrepreneurs in 2008. And so we got together to try to, like, cooperatively meet our common needs and challenges as Black women trying to do our thing. And we were tired of, like, waiting for other people to have festivals and, like, events in order to sell our wares and to, like, interact with our community and that kind of exchange, and decided that we wanted to do that ourselves. But many of us were interested in, operated and used a lot of principles and values that are African. And so a lot of what we did was made, like, Africana culture the center of what we do, right? And so we pulled some of the Adinkra symbols and principles as some of the sort of guiding tenets of what we were building. We used those as, like, guidelines for how we, like, did business with each other in our own marketplace, to set standards for the kinds of products that we were creating, right? Like, there is a symbol out of West Africa, and I can't remember what it's called, but it means do no harm, right? And so we said, for us, that means that when we create products for our people and for human beings, period, right, we're not going to use things that are going to bring harm to people, right? So, like, our motto is creating a new standard, right? And so Ujima is the fourth principle of Kwanzaa, right? And so it was a way to bring those principles into practice, right? It's enough, we'd be like, oh yeah, Black people, like, we talk about this and blah, 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 blah. I think one of the, and I get it, like, this culture, like, the word hotep, right, like, is, like, the slang for, like, that, like, overly conscious, like, person who's all extra or whatever. But I feel like it's such a disservice and it's like lightweight disrespectful to our actual historic experience and our culture, right? Because I totally get it, right? Like there are Black people who espouse all of these different things, right? And a lot of what they might say is not even rooted in anything that's real or practical or whatever, right? And also can be very judgy and all of this stuff. But the reality is like those words like belong to all of us, right? And that we minimize our own history and our own roots, right? Because we have power in that, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to wear a head wrap or you have to wear African fabric or you have to dress a certain way or talk a certain way. But it's about being respectful of our ancestors and all that they've contributed, right? Because the reality, so much of what we experience and go through now, right? Like the answers are within us. Like the answers are in our own experience. Like they're in our collective journey. They're with our ancestors. Like if we would just say, right, turn around and look back at what we've been through, like we don't have to recreate certain things. Like we have it, right? So one of the things that we did in order to start the work that we did as Black women in business is we looked at what like African women were doing before they were colonized, right? Like what experiences of success do we have to build on, right? And that we don't always have to compare ourselves to every other group, right? Like we have it, like we already did these things. And so when we looked at Nigeria specifically, and